that in the current document. Once you complete that, let's take a look here. Perfect. On unit of work, we are going into product and retrieving all product. Where we have the create, we do not need the custom validation, so I can remove that. And this looks good. Inside the edit get action method, we are retrieving the product here, and rather than category, let me also rename this. So lowercase category, we will rename that to lowercase product in the current document, and that looks good. Perfect. In the edit post here, we are updating. Inside the delete, we are fetching that. Looks good. In the delete post here, we retrieve the product and remove that. So with that, the controller looks great. Now we need to add views for our application. If we go back, we need to create views for the CRUD operation. We already have the views for category. Copy and paste that again. The complete folder, I will rename that to be product. And let me see what we have in index. In all of them, we have to replace category with product. So an easier approach is, let me open all of them here. Close the product controller. We only have the 4 view open here. Ctrl Shift F, replace in file. And we will replace that in all the open documents, which are all the views for our product. Replace all. Did not find any with the lowercase. Let me do that with uppercase here. And perfect, that worked. Now we have a different properties inside product. So rather than name, we have title. Let me rename that and paste it 2 times. After title, we have description. Let me modify that and paste it here. I will copy and paste this about 5 more times here. Then we have the ISBN. Let me modify that. Next, we have the author. After that, we have the price. First, we have the list price. Next, we have the price 50. Well, we first have the price. Then we will have price 50 and price 100. So copy and paste that 2 more times here. We have price 50. And finally, we have price 100. Great. That looks good for create. Let me copy this and go to edit here, paste it right here. Perfect. Inside delete as well, we will have to paste that and we will remove the validation. On top of that, let me disable all the input fields when we are deleting. Perfect. That looks good. Finally, we have the index here. Scroll down. And in index, I want to display 5 properties: title, ISBN, the list price here, author, and category. Where we have the for each here, we do not need any order by. And first we have the title. Next we have ISBN. Whoops, not that. Just ISBN. Copy and paste that 3 more times. We have the list price. Next we have the author. And finally right here, I want the category. But in our current model, we do not know what is the category of a book or product. We will cover that in the upcoming videos, but this looks good. With that in place, let me add a navigation to that in underscore layout, views, shared, underscore layout, we have the drop down, copy the ally, paste it one more time. This will be for product. And that looks good. I believe that is all that was needed, but let me run the project and make sure that works. We will go to content management, product here, and great. We have the product list here. Let me try to edit. Perfect, that looks good. Whoops, description is 2 times. In edit, let me remove one. And rather than input here, let me change that to be a text area. When we have text area, we need the explicit closing tag, else it will not work. When we save that, let's go back. The hot reload kicks in, and perfect, we have a text area. Now, of course, this is not perfect right now, but we will modify that in the upcoming videos. Right now, if I try to update something here, it should work, and perfect, that is working. Let me revert it back here. Let me create a dummy product here. Create. That works. Let me try to delete that. And perfect. All the operations are working as expected. The only thing that I will change right now is add a little bit of space. So let me go back. And in all of the views here, where we have margin top of 4, let me make that margin Y. Save that. It was in the edit. Perfect. That looks good. So I will add this margin Y4 in all the places. Delete as well. I need the margin Y. Create margin Y. Index margin Y. Perfect. Let me save all. Go back here. And perfect. Now everything is looking much cleaner. But basically we have the product CRUD operation. Those are working as expected. Next thing that I want to work on here is when we are working with product, we need an association between product and category. If we go to category, it is action, sci-fi, and history. Basically, any product that we have will belong to one of the category. So there will be a foreign key relation between product and category table. How can we accomplish that with EF Core? Now, if we did not have EF Core, we will basically have a column of category ID in the product table, and then we will have a constraint on foreign key which we will add in SQL Server. But thankfully, because of EF Core, we do not have to touch our database. All we have to do is define some constraint in our model, and Entity Framework will take care of everything else. So how can we accomplish that foreign key relation between category and product? Let me close all the tab here and let me open the model here, which is product model. There we basically need a column for category ID. So prop integer, I will call that category ID. Now if I add just this column, table will not know that this is a foreign key to the category table. In order to explicitly define that, we need a navigation property to the category table. So right here, we will have a navigation property to category table, and I will call that category. And on top of that, we have to explicitly define that this category property is used for foreign key navigation for the category ID. And for that, we have a data annotation of foreign key, and we can say that this category table has a foreign key which will be category ID right here. That is all that we have to write, and then Entity Framework Core will take care of everything else. So you can see how powerful Entity Framework Core really is. With that configured, let me save that and I will add a migration. So we will add a migration and I will call that add foreign key for category product relation. Now when you change anything with the core model, if it requires a database change, Entity Framework Core is smart enough and it does all of that. You can see it is adding a column here and it is updating some data. But when it is updating the data, you can see it is setting all the value to be 0 for category ID. That is not what we want. Because we are seeding our data, we need to actually pass category in that seed data. So this migration that got added, I am not happy with it because I am going to change something in the seed data and create a new migration. Now only because this migration has not been pushed to the database, I can directly come here and we can go to migrations and delete that migration. You do not want to do that directly here. You can go to Package Manager and you can write the command remove migration and it will remove the last migration that was added. You can see in the migrations folder that migration does not exist anymore and it got removed. So now we can add a new migration, but before we do that, we have to fix our seed data that is inside application DB context. Here we have to pass a category ID. You can pass anything you want. I am going to be random about it. Some of them I will say 1, the other one I will say 2 here, and last one I will say 3. So perfect. We have assigned some value to the category ID, and when we are seeding, make sure that you use the category ID that exists and not something random like 11. That will not work. With that configured, let me go to Package Manager and I will add the migration once again. Perfect. Let me see the values. Yep, we have the correct value this time and that looks good. So our migration is looking good. Let me update the database. And perfect, that is done. Let me go to SQL Server. We will do select top 1000. And great, we have category ID. On top of that, if you expand that and examine the keys, you will notice a foreign key relation between product and categories. So with that, if you try to edit here, and if you try to enter, let's say 11, it will not work because of the foreign key relation. So with that, you can see how easy it was to add a foreign key relation between table. All we had to do is use the foreign key data annotation. With that configured, let me continue from the next video. Now before we move any forward, let me open the product model in the models project here, and I will add one more property which is kind of critical, and that is image URL. When we work with any product here, they will typically have an image, so let me call that as image URL. It will be a string property right now and it will be empty right now. With that, let me save this and we will have to add a migration. I will call that add image URL to product. The seed entity did not work. Well, you can go there in the data and you can add an empty image URL. That should work right now. We will fix that as we proceed with the course. Perfect. Let me add the migration once again and it should work. Perfect. Let's update the database. And great. Now our model for product is complete and we have added all the properties that are needed. How this image URL will work, that we will cover in the upcoming videos. What we want to work on is when we go to product and we edit a product or create a product, we cannot toggle the category. So let me fix that first. We need to add a drop-down right here. Before we even add that drop-down, we need a list of all the categories that we can display in the drop-down. So first we need to retrieve that in the controller. If I open the product controller, when we are passing it back to the view, we are passing list of product. On top of that, we need to pass list of all the categories, or we can pass a select list that we can use to populate a drop-down. Now there are multiple ways to pass that thing. But if we want to pass that along with this object, that is not possible because when we return back, we can only pass one object. We will see how to overcome that in the upcoming videos, but let's say you only want to return a list of product and not any other model. In that case, if we have to pass some additional functionalities, there are many other ways, but before we see how to pass that, we actually have to retrieve that. So to retrieve that, I will store that in an IEnumerable of select list item. If I press Ctrl dot here, it is inside system.collections.generic, that is the IEnumerable, and select list item is inside microsoft.asp.NET Core.mvc.rendering. Now if I press F12 on the select list item, it will navigate me to the class here, and you can see with the select list item, we have text and value, and that is what we will be populating and using in our dropdown. So let me call this category list is equal to, we need to retrieve all the categories, so unitofwork.category.getAll, and then if we just do that, it will not work because here it is retrieving an IEnumerable of category, and we have to convert that to an IEnumerable of select list item. How can we do that dynamic conversion while we are retrieving some things from the database? In order to do that, we have something powerful known as projections in EF Core. In order to use projections, we will say .select, and there we will give it a random object. Let me call that U. And what object do we want to return from here? We want to return a new select list item. So we will write that, and inside there, what properties should be populated? Let me break it out in different line here. We want to populate the text, which is inside u.name, and value we want ID of the category. So u.id, convert that to a string. That way what will happen is each category object here will be converted into a select list item, and it will have a text and a value. And that is how we can convert a category to an IEnumerable of select list item using projection. Again, this is a very powerful feature because you can see how in a single line, when you are retrieving something, you can easily pick only some columns and not all the columns. You can convert that to a new object and directly assign that. With that, we have the category list right here. But now the question is, how do we pass that onto our view? Let me do that in the next video. Now we have to pass some data from our controller to our view. And for that, we have multiple items or multiple routes that are available. First one here is a ViewBag. ViewBag transfers data from controller to view and not vice versa. And that is exactly what we want. We want to pass the data that we have in our controller to our view, and it is ideal for a situation in which the temporary data is not in a model. Like in our example, we need the drop-down list, and that is not within our model. We do not have a property to store that. So in that case, we can store this in a ViewBag and pass that to our view. ViewBack is a dynamic property that takes advantage of the new dynamic features in C# 4.0. Any number of properties and values can be assigned to a ViewBack, and the ViewBack's life only exists during the current HTTP request. ViewBack values will be null if there is any redirection. Like in our case, we will be passing the value from controller to view and we will not be redirecting. That is why the ViewBack value will persist. Last point is that ViewBack is actually a wrapper around view data. Now you might think, what is view data? But we will cover one thing at a time. First, let me switch back and show you how we can use ViewBack. Right here in the code we are getting all the category list, but I am inside the index section. Let me cut this. We actually need that inside the create action. So right here, let me paste that here. And now you might be thinking that we are not passing anything here. Why don't we pass the category list? But if I go to the view, you can see we have defined a model at the top, which is the product model. So now we need to pass this category list to our view, and we want to use ViewBack. So for that we can say ViewBack.categoryList is equal to category list. We can give any name that we want, and this name that we give here will basically act as a key value, where key will be category list and value will be whatever we assign here. Once we add this here, then inside the create we can fetch that and display that in a dropdown. Let me scroll down, and where we have the price 100, after that let me copy and paste it one more time. Label will be for category ID. ASP validation, we can change that to be category ID, but here we want the select field. Now when we are using select rather than input, we cannot use the self-closing tag. We have to explicitly close that. And after that, I will add one more default option here, which will be disabled, selected by default, and there we will display select category. Now ASP4, we have that as category ID, but we need to display all the items in the dropdown. For that we have a special tag helper ASP items, and this expects an IEnumerable of select list item. We have that in our ViewBack, so in order to extract that we will write ViewBack dot and we need the key name. Now key name, if you write here, it will not help with IntelliSense because it is not dynamic. You can give any key name here and IntelliSense cannot detect what you gave, so you have to type that and make sure that it matches. If there is any spelling mistake, things will not work. For the class here, we will give it a bootstrap class of formSelect, and with that, let me run the application. We go to product here, and we will have to go to create new product, scroll down, perfect. We have select category, and there we have action, sci-fi and history. So our dropdown is looking great with create product. Now that is one way of doing things with ViewBack. Let me continue and show you the alternative in the next video. We have seen ViewBack in the last video. Next we want to see how we can accomplish the same things with ViewData. ViewData also transfers the data from controller to view and not vice versa. And again, it is ideal for the situation where the temporary data is not in a model. ViewData is derived from ViewData Dictionary, which is a dictionary type. ViewData value must be typecasted before use. Like if we go back, when we were using ViewBack right here, we did not have to cache that data. It was all dynamic. But when we use ViewData, we will have to cache that before we use the value. And lastly, the ViewBack's life only lasts during the current HTTP request, and ViewData value will be null if redirection occurs, similar to view bag. So there are quite a few things that are similar here, but let us see that with an example. First, we have to go back to the controller. Let me comment this out, copy that and paste it here. Rather than view bag, we want to use view data. If you use dot there, it will not work. You have to define that in a square bracket. And what is the key value? Like in a dictionary. That is how you assign a value to view data. Now the question is, how do you access that inside view? When we were using view bag, we did not have to do conversion, but with view data, we will have to do some conversion here. So we will use the @ sign and we will say view data here. Write the key name. Let me go back and copy that to avoid any spelling mistake. And then we have to explicitly convert that. So we will say as, and this will be an IEnumerable of select list item. With that, the errors go away, and you can see how view data might be a little inconvenient as compared to view bag. But with that, everything should work the same. Let me restart the application and see that in action. We go to create new product and perfect, that is functional. But there is one more thing that you should be aware of. View bag internally inserts data into the view bag dictionary. So the key of view data and property of view bag must not match, because both of them will go to the same entity. Now before I wrap up this video, previously we have seen temp data, which are used to generate alerts, and temp data can be used to store data between two consecutive requests. Temp data internally use session to store the data, so think of it as a short-lived session which will only exist for one request. Now temp data value must also be typecast before use, so check for null values to avoid any runtime errors. Finally, as you already know, temp data can be used to store only one-time message like error messages or validation message, and if you refresh the page after that, it will go away. So that gives you a brief idea on all the differences between view bag, view data, and temp data. Now we know view bag, view data, and we are using that in our application. But think about that. When you have an application and if it grows, you have many more data. What if you have 10 view data and 5 view bags that you are using? Things will start getting ugly because when you will look at the view, you will not be able to easily identify where this is coming from. And the reason I am saying is our view is tightly bounded to this product model, but product model does not have all the data that is needed. So typically I avoid using view bags and view data as much as possible. The alternative to that is to tightly bind your view to the object that you want. If object is not a simple object, you can create a combination of object, and that is called as view model. View model, as the name suggests, it is a model which is specific for a view. So let me show you how to do that, and then everything will make much more sense. In our models folder, let me right click, add a new folder with the name of view model. I will have to stop the application here, and I will call that view models. Inside there, I will add a new class file, and I will call that product view model, where VM stands for view model. It will be a public class, and we will think about what will be all the entity that we want for our product. We want a product object, so first let me create that property, which will be product. Next, what we want is an IEnumerable to hold the drop down. So we'll say prop, and that will be an IEnumerable of select list item. When we need the select list item here, we will have to install the NuGet package microsoft.aspnetcore.mbc.view-features. The property name, we will call that category list here, exactly what we have in the product controller. Now inside create, we were not passing anything to the view, but if we go to our view, we were using product. Now what we will be using is product view model. We cannot access that directly, so we will go bulkybook.models.viewModels. We have the product view model. Now view model is something that we will be using in many of the views. So it makes sense to add this to our import statement inside the admin area, view import. Let me add that using statement, and I will also add this, copy that to our customer view, view imports, and we have a global view imports as well. Perfect. Let me save and close all of that, and now we can remove this. Product view model will be detected. When we add this here, our title is inside product, so we will have to add that in all the places. Let me modify that for all of the properties here. Whoops. You can see the errors went away, and then where we have the ASP items, we do not want any view data. We want to access that directly from our product view model. If we go back, we have the category list here. Now if you try to access category list directly here, it will not work. So basically when you have to access something from the model directly, and if it does not work, you can always access the model by using the @ sign. So we can say @ model, and there we have the category list. Now the product here is working, but if for some reason this was not working, you can access product by writing @model.product. Both of them are exactly the same things. So perfect. We are using our view model. Let me scroll down. I believe everything else is working. Let me build the project here and see if that works. We still have to modify our controller, but let me do that now. Product controller, where we have the create, we need to pass a product view model. So right here, we will say product view model. Let me call that product VM is equal to new. And then we have to assign the properties here. Category list will be inside category list, comma, we have the product. Product will be new product. So perfect, that looks good. And then we will be passing the product view model. If you want, you can just cut this from here and assign that to the category list like that. It should also work. We do not want the view data or view bag. Let me remove that. Perfect, much cleaner. With that, we have a view model that we are passing to our create view. Let me run and see if that works. We go to product here and create new product. Perfect, that is working. But now if you post here, it will not work, because if you examine in the HTTP post, we said that there will be a product obj. This we have to modify to product VM, and when we are adding something, we'll say obj.product. With that configured, let me save and run the application and try to create a new product. I will populate dummy information. Category, let me make it action and create. and we see an exception. Now you might be wondering on why we are getting this exception. Because the exception here is inside the select field and it says object reference is not set to an instance of an object. That is a common exception when you are working with C#. Basically anything that is being accessed here does not have a value. But why when we are posting it is trying to access these fields? The reason is simple. Something in model state is not valid and it is returning back to the view. When it returns back, we are not passing the view model, so dropdown is not populated. Let me show that. I will add a debugging point here and let me hit create once again and see model state is valid is false. Now what property is false here? We can examine that in the result view, and the category list is invalid, the image URL is invalid, and the product.category is invalid. Now why is it validating all of those properties? We do not want the validations on them. So basically we need to tell that, hey, when you are validating our model, I do not want validations on these three entities. One way to fix the image URL right now is, let me go back to the create view and let me just copy and paste this for image URL. That way we will not be bothered with that exception, and let me show that. Now of course we will fix image URL as we proceed, but right now let me show you the issue with other two entities. We hit create here, let me hit create here, model state is not valid, and now there will be two entities. One will be category list and another will be category. So we basically do not want to validate those two properties. Doing that is super simple. All we have to do is add an annotation on top of the category list, which is validate never. And that will make sure that it does not validate this property that we have. I will also have to add that where we have the category right here. And if you want, you can also add that to the image URL. That way you are not bothered with that as well. With that configured, let me run the application again and see if creating a product works. We go to product here. Let me try that once again. Well, I have description 2 times. Let me remove that first. That is annoying. Save that. And the page should reload. Perfect. Let's try. Create. We go back. Now model state is valid, that is good, and it will create the product. Great, that works. But if the model state was not valid, we do not want that ugly exception. So how do we fix that? To do that, let me just bring back this validate never, comment it out for just few minutes, and basically when we are going to the else block, it expects the dropdown to be populated. So whatever we have here, if I copy that to the else part and paste it here, and I pass this view model back, then it will work. Let me have this return statement in here. Now if we did this, then it will create a new product view model. We do not want that. We only want the dropdown to be populated. So right here where we have the obj, we can say obj dot category list and just populate that list, not anything else. When we return back, we will return the obj, or I think the better name here will be product view model. So let me rename that. Perfect. With that, if I remove debugging point and run the application, it will redirect us back to the product page. Let me show that. We select some category, hit create, and it redirects us back, but we do not see the error message. The good thing is we do not see that ugly exception, But the error message, we have already handled that with validate never. So let me bring that back. I only wanted to show you that when you return back, you have to populate the dropdown once again. Because when it is being posted, that dropdown will not be populated if you encounter any errors on the page. So this looks perfect. That way we are handling if the model state is not valid, we make sure to populate the dropdown again so we do not see that ugly exception that we saw before. But with that, our create functionality for product is working as expected. Now we have a view model for our product. Based on that, we already are binding our category as well. If I directly press create here, we have all the validations in place as well. And with that, we have seen how to add view models. Now to summarize again, view models are models that are specifically designed for a view. And the advantage that we get because of that is that a view will be strongly typed to one model. And because of that, view models are also known as strongly typed views. So if someone will ask you what is a strongly typed view, that basically means that there is a model that is specific for that view. Because of that, the view is strongly typed to a model. So it is always good to remember that term as well. Now before we work on anything else, where we have the image URL, we want this to be a file upload. Let me switch back here. Let me close the git commit here. And I will go to create. Right now we are only working on create and not edit. And I have a very good reason for that, which I will cover in the upcoming video. But right now, let me scroll down. Where we have the image here, we do not want the ASP4. We will say input type is equal to file and form control looks good. We do not want validation. Let me remove that. And let me go back and see how that looks. Perfect. Looks good here. Then where we have the form right here, we will have to add one thing. We have to add the ENC type, which will be multi-part form data. If you do not add that, then file upload will not work. So make sure that in your form, you have multi-part form data. With that, we basically have an input element, or rather an input file upload in the product create. Right now we have been working on create new product. And I said before we are only working there and not on edit because I want to show you one thing in this scenario. When you look at the create page, it looks exactly same to what we have for edit, but the details are populated when you select edit. Many times in the application, what user have is they have a single page for create and edit, and based on if there is an ID here, they retrieve and display that, and they display update rather than create. That way there is a single page for create and update, and that is exactly what we want to do as well. We have seen the different pages for create and update when we were working with category, but for product, I want to combine both of them in a single page. Before we work on the view here, we need to modify the controller. Where we have the create controller, rather than create, a more meaningful name is upsert. And what I mean by upsert is up stands for update and cert is basically combination of insert. So if you have update and insert, you remove this thing and you come up with upsert, and that name is commonly used when you combine update and insert in one functionality. In upsert, you might have or you might not have an ID. If you are creating, then you will not have an ID, but if you are updating, then you will get an ID. The functionality that you have here looks good for create. But if ID is present, then basically we have to retrieve that product and assign it to this product inside the product view model. So what we can do is right here have an if condition, and if ID is null or if ID is equal to 0, that means it is a create and we can directly return back to the view. In the else part, that means it is an update functionality because ID is present. This will be equal to, and if we have update, then we will have to populate product view model dot product is equal to underscore unit of work dot product dot, we have the get functionality, and we need to pass the link operator u goes to u dot id is equal to the ID. We are using get here and not get all because we know this will only return, or ideally it should only return one record, and that is the product. Once we retrieve that, we can return back to the view and return back product view model. So the first functionality here is for create and later one is for update. With that, the upsert controller here looks good. We need to modify the post action method for upsert as well. And when we are updating, if you remember, let me go to create, we added multi-part form data. When a file is uploaded here, we will get that here in the iForm file. We will make that a nullable field and let me call that as file. Now right now I do not want to focus on what we will do here, or rather any functionality in here. We will do that later on. We do not need edit. I can remove them altogether. Perfect. So upsert post, we will come back to that, but let me modify the view. So if I go back to the views of admin, product, create, we will modify that to be upsert, and we will remove edit. We do not need that. Right, let me open upsert and work on that. When we are in the form, we should have the ID in the hidden property. That way when we post, we always have that populated. After that, where we have the title create product here, if ID is present, this should be update product, so we have to make that dynamic. We will use the @ sign here, and we can check model.product.id. If that is not 0, then we will display update, else we will display create. We can remove this create product, and that should be dynamic. Let me run the application. We will not be able to navigate that directly because when we go to product, this is going to the create action. We will have to modify that. That is inside underscore layout here. Product controller. We have the index action that looks good. Whoops, it is inside index. There, it will be upsert. Let me scroll down where we have edit. It will be the same action, upsert. Save that, and we need to stop and restart. Let me navigate to product here, and we hit create new. Perfect, goes to upsert here. If I go back and try to edit, it goes to the same view, but you can see data is populated and we see update product. Let me also modify the button text here. So let me go back to upsert. We have the button. Here we can also add an if condition and be like if model.product.id. If that is not 0, then we want update, else we will keep create. Copy this, paste it here, and call that as update. Now right now I am keeping things super simple, but we have if else condition. Moving down the road, we will be adding some more validation on update. That is why I have added an if else condition rather than an inline functionality of just renaming the text here. So perfect. With that configured, if I go back, we have update and that looks good. Before I work on anything else, if I go to product here and try to create a product, you can see the description here is a text box. I want to convert that to a rich text area. For that, I will be using something called as TinyMCE here. And we have the editor right here. You can see it is a fancy editor and you can do quite a few things with description. Make it as fancy as you want. For pricing, if we go here, you will see that it is free forever if you use the core version, and that is good enough for our requirements. So let me log in here, and if you do not have an account, you can always continue with Google. Once we log in here, we have the cloud dashboard. Now I already have registered for the account, so you can see some other usage that I have. But if you sign up here, you will see the cloud integration, and that is what we need to get started. First thing is the script here, so let me copy the script that is displayed and we will go back to our application. We will open underscore layout, and where we have the JavaScript at the end here, let me paste that. Once you do that, if you scroll down, there will be the Tiny API key, but that key is already included in the script here, so you can directly use the script right here. Now that we have the script in place, we have the actual usage right here, and let me copy the script tag here. Only thing that we need is a text area on the page, because you can see the selector here is text area. So let me go back here, and in the product I will open Absurd, where I have the description. I will convert that to be a text area, and with text area we need the explicit closing tag. Now with description we do not want any validation, so I can remove that, and we have to add the JavaScript. If you notice here, we have a section for script. Inside there we can paste the JavaScript code, and that should work. With that configured, let me save everything, go back, and perfect. You can see we have a nice editor right here. Now with that, we do not see the description at the top, so let me go back here, and where I have the description, cut that and paste it, and I will remove the form floating. And where we have the class, I will give it a class of text muted for the grayish color. Perfect. That looks much better. You can see we have fancy fonts here that could be applied, and our description can now be super fancy. If we go back here, and when we scroll down, you can see in the toolbars and plugins, we have quite a few plugins right here. We might not need all of them. We can remove the image here, link here, media, search, replace. Let me remove that. And let me remove the links here. I guess that should be good enough. Let me see how that looks like. Save that, go back. And yep, that looks better. You can always play around with what plugins you want, but I will leave that selection to you. With that, we have implemented TinyMCE right here on the product page. Now finally, what we want to work on is when we select an image here and hit the create button, we need to save that image somewhere in our code here, and we need to also update the image URL. Let me do that in the next video. Now when we select an image here and hit the create button, we need to save that image. All the static files of our code must always go into one folder, and can you tell me which folder that is? If you said www root folder, you are 100% correct. So inside the www root folder, let me stop the application. we will add one more folder for images. In that folder, I will create a subfolder with the name of product. With that in place, let me open the controller again and let me remove this controllers folder because it is empty. All the controllers are inside the areas folder. So let me delete this. We do not need that anymore. And we have the product controller where we have the upsert post action method. Right now we are not handling create and edit because we have handled that in the get here, but we still have to handle both the scenarios when we are upserting. But inside the iForm file, we will receive the file that was uploaded. So we have to capture that file and we have to save that inside the images product path. So now our question is, how do we access this root path of our application, which is www root folder? To do that, we have to inject something called as iWebHost environment, and that is provided by default with the .NET project. So basically we have to inject that like we are injecting the iUnit of work, but the good thing is we do not have to register that. That is a built-in functionality that is provided with the .NET project. So I will say private read only iWebHost environment, and let me call that underscore webhost environment. We have to inject that using dependency injection. And then using this web host environment, we will be able to access the www root folder. So if the model state is valid, we can say string www root path is equal to underscore web host environment dot we have the web root path. That path will basically give us the root folder, which is www root folder. After we get the root path here, we can first check if file is not null. So basically, if file is not null, then we want to upload the file and save that in the product folder. Now when the file is uploaded, file might have some weird name. So rather than keeping the same name, we can rename that to be a random GUID. So right here we can say string file name is equal to GUID.newGUID.toString. That will give us a random name for our file. Then right now we have the www root path. We need to navigate to the product path. So I will say string product path is equal to path.combine, and I want to combine the www root path with another path, which is images/product. That will give me the path inside this product folder where we have to actually upload this file. The file name here is only a random GUID, but we need to preserve the extension that is there in this file. So where we have the file name here, I can say plus, and we have to get the extension. So path, inside there we have a helper method which is getExtension, and we will pass file. In there we have the file name. So the image that we will be saving will have a GUID and it will have the same extension that got uploaded. We have the final image name here and we have the location where we have to save that. With both of that configured, let me save that image. We will add a using here. We will say variable file stream is equal to new file stream. And there we have to give the final path as well as the file name. So basically the complete URL. So I can do path.combine there, and we can combine the product path with the file name. That will give us the ultimate location where we have to save that file. When we are using file stream here, we have to pass one more property here, which is file mode, and we'll say file mode dot create because we are creating a new file there. In order to copy the file, we will say file.copy to, and we want to copy the file to the file stream that we have right here. That will copy the file in the new location that we added or configured right here on line 60 and 61. Now that is great, but in the product view model, if we examine, we have product where we need to save the image URL. So wherever in the folder here we are saving that image, we should save that in the product image URL. So right here we will say product view model dot product dot image URL is equal to, and we know that will be inside the images folder. I will add the / there. We have the product folder, and then I want file name and extension. Both of them are inside the file name variable, so we will save that. With that configured, our create functionality looks good. After that, we are adding the product here, saving that, and we have the temp data product created successfully. Now right now, even though this is absurd, we are only handling creation of a product with a particular image. So let me run the application and make sure that works before we work on updating any product and updating their image. We will go to product here, and let me try to create a product. Let me select an image here, and we will hit the create button. And we have an exception, cannot insert null into image URL. Let me see why that happened, because we are updating that right here. Let me add a debugging point and see what is going on. Let me continue, go back here, re-add the image and hit the create button. Model state is valid. Let me see if the file came through. That did not. For some reason that is null. Let me go to absurd and see we have the multi-part form data that looks right. Where is the input form? Right here. Well, we have type is equal to file, but if we go to controller, it expects a file name. We do not have that here. We have to give it a name of file as well. That is how it will bind that to this variable, and we will have to rebuild and apply changes. Let me try that. Let me select image again, hit the create button, and perfect. File came through this time. Let me debug and also show you the product being populated in the folder. File is not null. We get the new file name with the extension. Product path here. That looks good. File stream. Now once we execute this copy to the folder here with product, you can see it already has that image, but if you open that in File Explorer, it is empty right now. I can show that. Properties, you can see it is 0 bytes. Because right now the file stream is open, but it has not copied. Now it has copied that through. So if we go and see properties again, we have the size of the product. Once we do that, we populate image URL and we add that product. We press F5. Product created successfully. So perfect. With that, our create functionality for product is working, but when we edit that product, we need to somewhere see that image. Let me add that in the next video. Now what I want to do is where we have the update or rather create, rather than taking up the full width here, we will take column 10 and the 2 rows on the right hand side, we will reserve that for the product image. So we have to make some designing changes. Let me go to absurd. We have our form here. Inside there, let me add a div, give it a class of row. In that row, we will say div class of column 10. And I will add one more div with a class of column 2. Whatever we have in the div here, let me cut that and paste it in class of column 10. Save that. And perfect, it got shifted. On the right side here, we will display the image. So let me scroll down here. And we need the image tag img. src is inside model.product.image URL. And we will give it a width of 100%. I will also give it some custom styling here. And let me close that tag. Let's go back and perfect. We have the image that is being displayed here. When we go to create, it will be empty, and that is okay. Now our create is functional and we can see the image. But in the update functionality, we have not added anything inside the post method. If I go back here, controller, everything that we have here is for create. Well, not there. In the post here, we only have product.add. We have not handled how to update the product right now. So in the next video, let me manage updating product in the upsert action method. We want to manage updating a product in the product controller. But for that, first let's think about what should happen to the image. If we go back here, and let me go back, let's assume that when a product is created, they must upload an image. So next time when they are updating something, let's say they are only updating the description, and if they hit the update button, then we do not want to update the image. So basically when they are updating, if the image URL is null, then we do not want to update that. But if they are updating a new image, then we want to replace the existing image with the new image. So if a file is present when they are updating, then we want to delete the old file and we want to add this new file. Let me handle that scenario first. When we have to upload a new file, all the logic stays the same, but the only thing that we have to add here is we have to delete the old file if image URL is present and a new file is being uploaded. So if the file is not null and if image URL is present, so we will check here if product view model.product.image URL, and I can say string dot is null or empty. So if that is not null or empty, that means that there is an image URL and we are uploading a new image because file is not null. In that case, we have to delete the old image. In order to remove the old image, we need the path of that particular image. So we will say variable old image path is equal to path.combine. We need the root folder, which is inside www root path. And then if we examine our database here, bulky table products, you will notice that we have a / in the image URL. We need to remove that because we are using path.combine. So I will say product view model dot product dot image URL dot, we have the trim start, and we want to remove the /. For that we will have to escape that with another /. That will basically combine and give us the path of the old image. Then deleting that is simple. We have that in system.io.file. We first need to check if anything exists in that old image path. If it does, then we will delete system.io.file.delete the old image. So perfect. We will delete that image. We will upload a new image and we will update the image URL. That is great. But finally, where we are adding here, we will rather have to update. Now, how will we identify whether it is an add or an update? That depends on if the ID is present. So we'll say if product view model dot product dot ID is equal to 0, that means it is an add, paste that, else it is an update. So underscore unit of work dot product dot update product view model dot product. Perfect. Now before we test this, I want to modify something in the update, and let me walk you through that in the next video. We have added the code to update the product and remove old image if that exists. Let me see that in action here. We have an old image. Let me pin this so we can see the old image being deleted. And let me upload a new image. We will hit update here. And you notice here the new image was added, but the old one was not deleted. Let's debug and see what happened. We will add a breakpoint here. Let's go back and try to update a new image here. Update. And let's see. It did not go into the if condition here, and for some reason the image URL is null. The reason behind that is if I go back to the observed view, we have the image URL, but it is not there in any input field. Because of that, when the form is posted, it does not stay there. We will have to add the image URL in a hidden field as well, and that should resolve our issue. With that configured, let me run the application once again. Let me go to product and one with the image here. Let me delete the other image here because I know that is fake one. And I just have the last image that is there. Let me try to update this one. Update. And it should go inside the if condition. Perfect, that worked. If I continue here, you can see the old image was deleted and we have the new grid. If we click edit here, we have the new image. Perfect, update image is working as expected. But one issue is, let's say we are only updating the title here. If I save that, image stay as is, but if I go to edit here, image is still there. One thing that I will show here is EF Core is smart. If I update this to be the title here, and let me add a debugging point once again, we are not modifying the image here. If I press update, you will notice it goes to the update here and it has the new product. That has everything right here, and the product here title is updated. EF Core will basically update all the properties right here along with title. So if in case somehow the image URL was empty here, then that image would be removed from the table entry. So what we can do is, in this case, even though the update is working, when we are updating, we can be explicit about what needs to be updated. So right now everything is working, but if you want, you can be explicit. If we go to repository, product repository, we have the update method right here. Rather than directly updating the object here, we can retrieve the product object from database based on the obj ID that we receive right here. And once we have that product from the database, we can manually update that. So we can say if obj from db is not null, then we want to update which properties. We will have to do a manual mapping for all of those properties, and after that we can be explicit that if obj.imageURL is not null, only then you update the image URL. If you have any other custom logic, you can add that here as well, but this is how you can do a manual mapping if you want. And that is one of the reason I have update inside the individual repository and not in the generic repository. With that configured, if you run the application, everything will still work the same. Let me see that in action. And let me also examine the product image here. So have that side by side. I will update the title here and maybe the description. We update that, hit the debugging point. Let me remove that. And perfect, both of them are updated. Final thing, we have the category ID that is being displayed here, but we need to display that inside the product index. Let me do that in the next video, but before that, let me add image to all of the other books that I have. So Fortune of Time, I will select that, update, Dark Skies, I have an image for that. Next, Vanish in the Sunset. We have Cotton Candy. And Rock in the Ocean. Leaves and Wonders. Perfect. We will not delete these two right now. We will handle that in the upcoming videos. But if we edit, perfect. The images are now coming up for all the books. Perfect. Let me continue from the next video. Now we want to display the category name here. If we only had to display the ID, that was super simple. If I go to controller here, and let me add a debugging point on the product controller, index action, refresh that. If I examine the OBJ product list, you will notice we have category ID that is populated for our products. But we need to populate this category navigation property because inside there we have category name that we can access. So basically, based on the foreign key relation, we need this category to be populated. How can we do that smartly using EF Core? For that we have something called as include that will automatically include the navigation properties based on the foreign key relation, and it is provided by the EF Core team. So how can we use that? We will have to add that to our core repository because that is the method that we are using in the controller to get all the product. That is, where is that? Right here. Now before I add that in the get all logic, let me show you how that will work with directly application DB context right here. We have _db.products. On there we have something called as include, and you can see right here it says specifies related entities to include in the query string. So let me add that, and what we want to include, we can write that by saying u goes to u dot, and we want to include category. That is how what will happen is that category will automatically be populated when it retrieves all the product based on the foreign key relation. So this is great, but how can we add this same logic inside the get all that we have right here? For that we will have to add a logic, but I want to show you one more thing. Right now we only have category that we want to include, but if you had to include more properties, you can add multiple include statements, and rather than category, if this was something else, you can include that as well. So include can have multiple variables like category, category ID, maybe you have cover type or something else that could also be included. We want to make sure that our repository can handle that scenario. For that what I will do is we can have a nullable include properties, and that will be string. Now right here it is a link operator. When we are saying it will be a string, what do we expect? Basically we are saying that if someone gives us category or category ID, based on that we can build the include properties. Now category ID is just an ID, so things will not work. So for an example, I am saying, let's say there are two things, category and cover type, that a user has to include. So if in include properties they provide that with a comma separated string, then we can add that in the include statement when we are building the query here. One thing that is very important here is this category must match exactly that you see right here. If you use a lowercase c here, things will not work, because let's say if we try a lowercase category, you can see it is not working. So it must match what you see in the include statement that is working here, and that is exactly what you should pass in the string parameter right here. Let me add this inside the interface as well. We have the interface repository interface, get all, and when we are getting something, at that point also we want to include properties, so we will add that logic in both the places. Then we need the actual logic of adding that. Basically, we will first check here if include properties is not null. In that case, well, rather than null here, I will rather check string.isNull or empty. So if it is not null and empty, we will add a not sign. Then we want to include properties like what we see on the top right here. But we will be receiving them as a comma separated values. So we will have to split them. We will have a for each, and I will say include prop in include properties dot split, and we will split them by a new character, which will be comma. And here I will say string split options dot remove empty entries. So if any entry is empty, it will remove those. And let me split this in a separate line so it is easier to read and understand. Then where we have the query, we will say query is equal to query.include, and we want to include the include prop that we are splitting. If there is only one, then also it will work, but we have made sure that if there are more than one include properties, we can add them as a comma separated list, and our repository is dynamic to handle that. Same logic that we have in get all, we will add that to get as well. So let me add that here, and we will add the include properties. Perfect. We have added the include properties in both get and get all repository. With that configured, let me close everything, open the product controller. We do not need anything else here. And when we are getting all, we can define the include properties. We want to include category. Now right now I am intentionally adding a lowercase because I want to show you this will not work. So let me run the application with a lowercase category and see what happens. We go to product here and we get an exception with the include properties. You can see unable to find navigation category in the string-based include path category. That is because it does not find that navigation property. If you correct that case here and run it, it should work. Perfect, no exception this time. And if you examine the result here, category is populated and we have the category name. So finally we can display that in the absurd. In the index here, let me go to the view where we have the category. We can navigate them by obj.category.name. Save that and continue. And perfect. Our category is being populated and everything is working as expected. But with that, we have learned an important concept in Entity Framework, which is how to populate the navigation property using .include. We are using a table layout with the product list here, but what if we want something fancy with the product? Like what if we want search functionality in the table, we want pagination, we want sorting, and all of those basic features. Rather than implementing all of that, we have third-party plugins that we can use, like we have datatables.net, where you can see it comes with all of those basic functionalities, and getting started is super simple. First thing that we have to do is include the CSS and JavaScript file. So let's do that. We go back, stop the application here, open underscore layout in views, and we will be adding the CSS file first. Link rel is equal to style sheet, href. Let me paste what we copied here. And that looks good. Scroll down. We need a script tag. Copy and paste it one more time here. And we need the src. Let me go back here. Copy the CDN. Paste it right here. Perfect. Both of those steps are done. And last step here is initialize the data table. In order to see that, let me click on Get Started here, and we will be using AJAX call to load all the data. Inside here, you can see we have a basic JavaScript where it is looking for an API endpoint to load that data. Now you might be thinking that will I have to add an API for this? Of course not. When you are working with .NET and if you create an MVC project, API support is already added in the controller. So whatever we were doing in index, we will have to do that in the API call. So we can just copy this line here, and let me scroll down at the end. Right here, I will add a section, or rather a region. Call that API calls. Have an end region. Within here, let me create an HTTP GET request. In there, we will say public iActionWizard get all, and that is already supported because we are using MVC architecture. There, let me paste the code that we copied here, and the product list here, we basically have to return back. So we can say return JSON here, and we will return a new object. So we will say new data is equal to obj product list. Simple as that. Now how do you test that? Let me run the application here, and we do not need the ID in the parameter. Let me remove that with get all. Run that one more time. Now we need to navigate to the controller and endpoint. It is inside admin, product, and name is get all. If I type that, you can see it retrieves the data here, and we have all the product. So our API is up and running in less than 1 minute because we are using MVC project and it has the support for API. So perfect, our API endpoint is functional. Now we need to call that API in an AJAX request and load our data table. Let me do that in the next video. We have to create JavaScript to post an AJAX request and load data. So that will be a little bit tricky. So let me walk you through all of that here. In the www root folder, we have CSS, JS. Right there, let me add a new file. I will stop the application, new item, and I will call that product.js. Let's add that. Now if we go back, let me copy what we have for data table, paste it right here. We are loading the data table here, but we need to do that on document.ready. Because of jQuery, we can use $document.ready, and we will call a method load data table. Let me create that function here, and inside there, I will basically cut and paste this code in a variable data table is equal to, and let me paste that. You can see it is looking for something called as my table, and that we will add later on, do not worry. Rather than my table, let me call that TBL data. First thing, we need the API URL. That is inside admin. We have product and get all. That should retrieve all the records. Now once we retrieve those records, we have to format that. If I go back to the documentation and go to the data tab here and scroll down, you can see we can render columns and that can have data. The first property here is data, but because we are using Ajax here, that will automatically be loaded. So we can copy the columns here, go back to the code, and I can paste it after the curly bracket, add a comma, and we will add columns. The columns here will be inside the colon here, and the Ajax as well, we will add that in double quotes. I will add that in curly bracket for the values, add a comma, and let me format that a little bit so that everything makes sense. We need the closing curly bracket here. Let me add that, and perfect. Things are looking good, but in the Ajax here, we can directly use that, or we can define the URL, because when we have Ajax call, it is possible you want more options or more properties. That is why it is an object. Next, we have the columns. Now we have the data here, and we have few names. And along with that, we can also give some option like what will be width of all the columns. Before we work on adding the column names here, let me actually go back to our index here, and where we are displaying the for each loop, that is no longer needed, because we will be using data table for that. In here, all we have to do is we need to add the ID of TBL data. So where we have the table, we will give that ID. We do not need the tbody. We can remove that. Data table will take care of configuring all of that. Only thing that we have to do is add the JavaScript code. So we will add a section for scripts. And inside there, we will add the reference to src.js product.js. We have already added data table in the underscore layout. So with that configured, let me run this, and I want to show you an error message, which is very common when you are working with data tables. We go to product here, and we have a warning. It says requested unknown parameter name for row 0 column 0. You can see we are asking for name here, and it does not find that. The reason is the JSON object that controller returns, it does not have anything with name. But if I change that to be title, and if I refresh here, this time you can see the error is position not found. That is because the column names are not valid, but title gets populated if you click OK. So you can see the issue right here. We need to have the exact column names. So if we go to index here, copy all of them like ISBN, price, and we have the author. Let me save that, go back here and refresh. You can see it is still not working. Why is that the case? Well, it has to match what the API is returned, and it is case sensitive. So we need to know what the API is returning. We can copy and paste this. Let me call the API product /get all. We can copy this API, go to JSON formatter, open that in a new tab, and let me paste our API code. Let me go back and copy that once again and paste it here, and perfect. You can see it is title, ISBN, author, list price has a capital P. So if you want to display that, it must exactly match. So let's do that. We will keep this open here. And where is that? Right here we have ISBN all lowercase, copy, paste that, list price, copy and paste that, author all lowercase, and finally we want the category name. Category name, if we go here, it is inside category and then we have name. So you have to write category dot and then the property inside there is name. That is exactly what you have to use, and once you do that, the error goes away. So if you notice that error message, that means in your data table your property names are not valid. Now if I go to index here, let me add a width of 100% for the table, and that looks much better. With that, we have title, ISBN, price, author, and category. We can modify some of the width in the product.js, like title can take 25%, ISBN, that's okay. This can take 10%, author can take up 20%, and category name, that looks good. If I sum them up, it is total of 85, I believe. So we have 15 more. In that 15 more, I want to display 2 buttons. So how can we add custom buttons where we have the columns? Let me show that in the next video. In data table, we want buttons to edit or delete any of the product. If I go back to the code here, we have basic columns. But with that basic column, we can make things super fancy. Let me show you how to do that. We will copy that, paste it one more time. The next column, whenever we are editing or deleting any of the product, we need the product ID. So for data, we basically need the ID here. If I save this and go back, it will display the ID. I do not want that to display the ID. Rather than that, I want to display some buttons right here. So for that, what I can do is there is something called as render, and there we can define a custom render function that we want. So here we will say function, and in the parameter we will take data, which is basically the ID. Now here inside the string, we will have to write the HTML that we want to render. Like if I add a div here with a closing div, and if I said hello, if I save that and go back, you can see it displays hello right there. But rather than that, in the div, let me add a bootstrap class of btn group, give that a role of group. Now right now I have to write everything in single line, but if we want multi-line, we can use the symbol which is on top of the asterisk where we can write multi-line HTML. So you can see we can break it out in different line and it still treats that as a string. First I will add an anchor tag here with href that is empty right now. We will add some bootstrap classes and I am adding a pencil bootstrap icon. If I save that here, go back, perfect, we have the edit button. Similar to edit here, let me make some space and add a delete button with an icon for trash fill. And great, that looks much better. I can reduce the width here to make sure that we have enough space. So let me do that. We will make this 10%, author can be 15, and we can change this to be 25%. Perfect, looks good. Now when a user clicks edit, we need to write the href here. So we have to redirect to admin area, product controller, observed action, and there we have to pass the ID. So ID, we have that in the data here. So we can use the $sign and use data because we are saying data is basically the ID. With that, if I go back, you can see edit is functional and that link is working as expected. In the next video, let me add an API endpoint for delete and then invoke that. Now we need to add the delete logic. So where we have the get all in product controller, Let me copy that, paste it one more time here, and let me call that HTTP delete here. We will name this as delete. When we are deleting, we need the ID. Based on the ID here, we will retrieve our product, and let me store that to be product to be deleted rather than obj. If product to be deleted is null, in that case I will return JSON, where in the object I will say success is false and message error while deleting. But if that is valid, then before we delete the product, we need to remove its image as well. So we will say variable old image path is equal to, and if I go to absurd where I was combining the path, that logic, I can copy this and we will paste that right here. Perfect. So we will delete the old path here. We need the www root path, which we can get from web host environment dot web root path. Image URL is inside product to be deleted dot image URL. Let me break this out here. Perfect. So we delete the image here. Next we will say unit of work dot product dot remove. We want to remove the product to be deleted, and underscore unit of work dot save. Finally, where we have to return the JSON here, we will say success is true and message delete successful. Let me stop the changes. We have an error. Let me see what that is. It says delete already exists. Let me see where that is. And yes, of course, we need to remove the existing delete functionality that we have. And I will also remove the delete view. In area, we have the delete. Let's remove that. With that, let me add a debugging point here and go to product.js. Now there, if I copy this, paste it here, rather than absurd, if I say delete here, and I can just pass /ID. Let me run and show you what happens. We go to product here. We have the fake product here. If I hit delete here, the API will not be invoked because that API has HTTP delete there. But if I remove that HTTP delete, let's see what happens. We go to product and the delete should work now. Perfect. It hits our breakpoint. It will remove the image and it will also delete the product. If I continue here, perfect. It says success is true and message delete successful. If I go back here, that product no longer exists. So our API is actually being invoked and it returns JSON. But typically what happens is when we are deleting, we like a confirmation. For that we will be using Sweet Alert, and let me show you how to add that to our project in the next video. When we are deleting our product, I want an alert, and for that I will be using Sweet Alert 2. If we see notification here, you can see it is a fancy notification. Let me go to the installation tab here, and we have the CDN. Let me copy that, and I will add that in our project. I have underscore layout here. Let me add that. Now how to actually invoke that. Now let me go to the examples here, and if we scroll down, we should have an example with confirm button. This is exactly what we want. We want a confirmation box, and if they select yes delete it, then we want to delete the product. So I can copy the sweetalert.fire, go back to our project here, and we will add that in product.js file. Let me create a function here, delete, where we will get the URL that needs to be invoked. I will paste the SweetAlert.fire. Now in here, when user selects OK, let's delete that. We want to make an AJAX request to our controller to delete this particular product, and I will make this HTTP delete. That is what it should have. I will do continue editing here, and let's go back. So if it is confirmed, I will say $.ajax, and we will have the AJAX request. We will first have the URL that we will receive in the parameter of the method right here. Next, we need the type, and that is HTTP delete. So we will write delete here. And what should happen if it is successful? Well, on success, let me have a function where we will get the data back. If it is successful, what are we returning back here? We are returning a success and a message. So that will be available in data right here. What I can do is I can just call our toaster notification.success and pass that data.message. With that configured, we have to pass this URL, and we will have to replace this href with an onClick. So we have the URL that looks good. What I can do is I can replace href with an onClick, call the delete function here, and I will pass that right here. That looks good. With that configured, let me rebuild and see if that works. We go to product here. Let me try delete. Perfect. If I hit cancel, nothing happens. But when I select yes deleted, it hits the endpoint, and if I continue, you can see on the UI that product is still visible. But that is not the case. If I load the product page again, that is gone. So what is happening is even though that product is getting deleted, the data table is not getting refreshed. Refreshing that is super simple as well. If I go back to product.js here, when we have the result success here, we can say datatable.ajax.reload. This data table, we have that right here, but in order to access that, we need to create a variable with the name of data table. With that, it will be available right here, and it will be able to reload that. So perfect. With that configured, let me restart and test everything once again. We will have to create a new product. I do not want to delete the existing products. Perfect, we have that here. We hit delete, yes deleted, delete successful, and the data table also reloaded. With that, we have all the CRUD functionalities for product working as expected. We have made great progress with our project. We have products where we have categories, and now what we should do is on the home page of the application, we should display all the products. And for that, you need to think about what we will do in controller and action method. Let me close the project here. The controller that we will be working on for that is inside customer. We have the home controller, index action. Now we will be working in the customer area because the home page will be accessible to all the users and not just admin user. In the home page, you need to think about what we need to display. We will be displaying all the products. So basically we need to get all the products from database, and for that we need unit of work using dependency injection. So let me add private read-only unit of work and inject that like we did in product and category controller. Then in the index here, we will get an IEnumerable of product, and let me call that product list is equal to underscore unit of work dot product dot get all. And when we are getting, we want to include category. So do not forget that. When we retrieve the product list here, we can return back to the view and we will pass the product list here. Next, we have to go to the view and design that view. First thing that you should think of is what will be model. That will be all lowercase, and that will be IEnumerable of product. We already have the using statement in the import. That's why we can directly write product right there. In there, let me add a div, give it a class of row and padding bottom of 3. And then we need to iterate through the IEnumerable. So I will add a for each loop variable product in model. For each one of them, I will add a div, give it a class of column large 3 and column small 6, bootstrap classes. In there, I will add a class of row and padding of 2. I need the closing div here. Perfect. There, I will add a div, give it a class of column 12, padding 1. Let me close that div as well. I don't know why the closing divs are not working as expected. Whoops. Let me align them. Control A, Control KD. Perfect. Then I will add the final div, which will be a bootstrap card layout. And there I will give class of card, border 3, padding 3, shadow, and border rounded. Within there, I want to display the image. So img src is equal to, that is inside product, which is the local variable that we have here, dot we have image URL, and I will give it bootstrap classes of card, img top, and rounded. Let me save that and run the application. We should see 6 image here. It might take a second, but perfect. I can see all of the images loaded right here. That looks great. After that, I can add a div, give it a class of card body, padding bottom of 0. Add the closing div as well. It is annoying when the closing div does not add itself. And I will add a div with padding left of 1. Inside the padding left 1, I will add 2 paragraph tag, and basically it has bootstrap classes for designing. First one I will display product.title, and next one will be product.author. Save that. Let's see how that looks here. And perfect, looks great. Let me go back to the code, copy the padding left one, paste it one more time here, and we don't want the card title. We will have text dark, opacity looks good, text opacity, and text center. At there, I will display the lowest price, so I will say as low as, and in a span, we will display product dot price 100, that is the lowest price that we will have, dot toString, and we will format that in a currency, so we will add C, and let me go back to the UI here. Perfect, looks great. So our currency looks good. Let me copy this, paste it one more time, and let me also display the list price. I think before we should display the list price and then the lowest price. That makes more sense. Perfect. List price and then the lowest price. Let me see. Perfect. Let me go back here, and before the span, well, inside the span I will add a class text decoration line through. That will make sure that it adds a line there, and before this I will display list price. Let me break it out in separate lines here. Perfect, that looks good. Let me organize this as well. And great. We go back to the UI and that looks much better. I want to remove the margin here. So where we have this, I will say margin bottom of 0. Let's see how that looks. And great. I like how the home page is coming along. Final thing that I want is a link to go to the product details here. So let me go back. After we have the div of cart body, I will add one more div here. In there I will have an anchor tag and we will display details. href, let me keep it as hash for now and see how that looks. Whoops, we have an error there. I forgot the double quotes and that should fix it. Perfect. So homepage of our application looks great. Now in the next video, let's work on the details page. When a user clicks on the detail page, we want to display all the product details on that page. So what will be the model for that page? It will basically be a single product. So what we should do is go back to the code here in home controller where we have index, copy and paste action method. We will call that as details and we will require an ID. Based on that ID, we will get all the details and not get all because it will be a single product. We will call that product and we will return that to the view. Let me do that. Perfect, that looks good. Now when we are getting a product, we need to add the link operator u goes to u.id is equal to id. Based on that, it will retrieve the product details. Once that is done, let me add that view. I can directly click add view here and add that. Change the name to be details. And let me make sure it got added in the right area. Yes, it did. Perfect. So with that, we have added what should happen on the details, but on the home page or the index, we need to add that redirect. Now because we are in the same area and same controller, I can only write the action method that call the action details. It will by default use the same area and same controller. But on top of that, when it is being calling that, if we examine the controller, we need to pass the ID. So if I go back here, we will say ASP route and name is ID. We will use the exact same name. If you want to call that as product ID, then we will have to use the same name right here. And that should work. So how do we get the product ID? That is inside product.id. Perfect, that should work. Let me run the application and see that in action. Let me click here. Perfect, product ID 1, go back, product ID 3, and that works. So perfect. Now we are able to navigate and that is working as expected. Now we need to design the details page. If we go to the home page, we have all the products and that design looks good. But when we go on the details page, we need to display image, category, price, and much more. Rather than spending time in writing Bootstrap and CSS, I have provided that in snippets. Make sure you have downloaded them and then in the snippets here, in section 6, in section 7, we have the details UI. Copy everything there and I will paste it inside our details view right here. Now whatever I have here, it is purely HTML and CSS. You can see there is no tag helpers or anything related to .NET programming. It is all HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. Save that, and if we go back and navigate to the details page, we have a fancy design template that is ready with only HTML and CSS. We need to populate this with all the dynamic data. So let me do that one thing at a time, starting with the title. If we go to the top, in order to get anything here, we need to add model. What will be the model? In details here, we are passing a product, so that will be our model. Where we have the title here, we will say model dot, we have title. Let me copy the model here. Next, we have model dot author. When we have to go back to the home page, we can add ASP action. It will be index action. Then we need the image here. That will be @model.image URL. Scroll down, we have category that is inside model.category.name, ISBN, list price is model.listprice, and we will convert that to currency. Then we have quantity here. We have price twice here. Let me see what is going on in the template first. We need the first price here, and then we need to toggle all the price. So here we will have model.price.toString and currency format. Paste that here. Let me copy .toString and let me see how the UI looks like. Perfect, looks good. After that, we need the description. Now before I work on description, let me go to product and make the description a little fancy. I will just go to lorem ipsum and let me generate something there. I will copy that, paste it here, and let me make some things bold, some things italica, and underline one word. Let me copy that, update, and I will save that for all the description. Now the reason I want to do that for all of them is that the UI looks a little consistent. So let me do that real quick. Because of all the scrolling, I think it was best if the back button was at the top here, so that could be updated later on. But perfect, description looks good. Now if I go to the home page, details here, and let me modify the description here to be model.description. You will see something ugly here, which is HTML text. That is because we have the rich text editor. And if we have to convert that, we have something called as html.raw, and we need to pass model.description inside there. And perfect. You can see it translates that exactly back to what we wanted. So back to home should work now. Let's go there, go to another details, and we have account button, which you can ignore. We have an add to cart as well, but that is coming soon. We do not have that in our functionality right now. I can go to the top here and I will add margin bottom of 4 as well. And perfect. That looks better for the details page. Now we will ignore the count here and add to cart, but basically on our website we have the home page and details page that is working as expected. We have the home page and the details page that are working as expected. With that covered, I want to work on authentication and authorization and scaffolding identity with the .NET project. When we talk about identity, we think directly about registration, login, what if the password is invalid, how to create all of those tables in the database, and making sure that security is top-notch. But when it comes to .NET project, we do not have to worry about all of that. The .NET team provides a default identity implementation that we can use with confidence, because it is built and provided by the .NET team. And that basically lifts off all the heavy lifting and we can trust the code that is being written. But how do we add that identity, which is login, registration, and everything related to that to our project? To get started, on the web project, we will right click, add, and we will select new scaffolded item. There we have identity and we can select that. Now in the later versions of .NET 8, the identity might get updated. If that happens, I will update the course as well, but this is what it is right now. On the top here, if we want a different master page, we can select that. If not, we can leave that. But then you can see all of the files that are provided by the identity team. We have many pages here for login, logout, set password, register, reset password, and much more. You will not need all the pages right here. So what we can do is we can select the pages that we want. But before I do that, we have something called as DB context. Now we already have a DB context in the data access, but you can see that is not being detected here. The reason it is not being detected is not because it is in its own project. It is because when we have a DB context for identity, we need to do some configuration, and we will do that before we continue. If I open the DB context that we have, which is application DB context, that basically implements the DB context. But if you have to implement the identity, then we have to implement something called as identity DB context. And if you press Ctrl dot here, we have to install the NuGet package Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.identity.entity-framework core. We can install that package directly from here, or we can say install with package manager, opens the package manager here, and we can install the .NET 8. Let me do that. Perfect, that is done. Once that is done, we have to add that using statement and the error goes away. Now that is the only change that we have to do. But when we use identity DB context, if we run our project, something will fail, and let me show that. We see an exception here. The entity type identity user login requires a primary key to be defined. I will not go into much details about what is going on here, but basically where we have the application DB context, if you have on model creating, there basically you will have to write this one piece of line. And that is because keys of identity tables are mapped in the on model creating, and if this particular method is not called, then you will run into the error message. So ignore all the details here. It is one of the configuration that is needed. So when we have identity DB context, we have to add base.onModelCreating model builder. And with that, if we run the project here, it should work again. And perfect. You can see the application is coming up here. We can navigate to the details and everything is working the same. But basically the DB context now is implementing the identity DB context rather than simple DB context. With that change of identity DB context, if we right click on the web project and if we try to scaffold the identity here, let me do that. And by default, let me override all the files, but the DB context, you can see it automatically now detects application DB context because that has identity DB context. With that configured, let me hit the add button. This might take a while, so let me wait for all the scaffolding to be done. And perfect, you can see that completed successfully. And in the Git changes here, you can see there are 79 changes. So quite a few things have been changed here and many things have been added. Let me walk you through all of that in the next video. Scaffolding identity is one of those things that has always some issues from what I have encountered. And this time also it is no different. When we scaffold identity, if I directly run the application, you will notice we have an exception here where we are seeing a weird exception with unit of work. Now because I have worked with identity and I know what exactly they are doing, basically they have added a new application DB context rather than using the existing application DB context. Now why they are doing that I have no idea, but identity has always had these issues. So to fix that you can just search for application DB context and you can see in areas identity they have added a new application DB context as well, which is not needed. This application DB context is basically implementing the identity DB context. That is what we had in our application DB context as well. And you can see the base.on model creating. That is what we added as well. The only thing that we do not have in our application DB context is the identity DB context. We have not defined the default user. That is not required, it is optional, but you can always define that, and perfect. With that it is exactly the same. So what we can do is close everything here and let me delete the application DB context that is inside the bulky book web project. We do not need that. With that deleted, let me try to build the solution. Perfect, everything is successful. Let me try to run the project and see if that works. And perfect, everything is functional. So now our application is working as expected with identity being scaffolded. And with that configured, now let me walk you through all the changes in the next video. Before we proceed further, let me walk you through some of the changes that we have. I know there are quite a few changes, but thankfully I have committed the changes so we can exactly see what is going on and what got updated. Perfect. So first thing in the application DB context here, we added the on model creating, and these are the changes that we did, so that looks good. Then the next thing here, let me take a look at program.cs in the bulky web project. There you can see in the green what got added. Basically when we scaffolded identity, it added a service which is add default identity for identity user, and there it has option where it is saying that hey, if you want to sign in, your email account should be confirmed. This is one of the option which is not required. So if you remove that, then if your email is not confirmed, even then the user can log in and we will go with that option. But on top of that we have something special here which says add entity framework stores, and then it has the application DB context. So what happens this time? When we add identity to the project, it basically also adds all the database tables that are needed for the identity. Like we have users table, we have roles table, we have user roles table, claims table, and many more. On this line 14, we are telling entity framework that hey, all of those tables will be managed with the help of DB context, which is application DB context. That is where we are binding entity framework with the identity tables. And with that, identity is added in program.cs. One thing that we should also add here is in the middleware, we should be adding use authentication, and that we must add before authorization. And the reason behind that is authentication is basically checking if username or password is valid. If the username and password is valid, then authorization comes into picture. Authorization basically tells that hey, now you have access to the website. But based on your role, you might have access to some pages and not all the pages. Like where we are updating the product and everything, maybe role of admin has access to that page. But if role of a logged in user is customer, they can only access home page and details page. They cannot access the product page. But in order to check role of a user, they must be first authenticated. So always remember that authentication will come before authorization. That looks good for program.cs. Let me see what is updated in app-settings.json. It added a new DB connection. We do not need that. It added that line because it was trying to add a new DB connection. We do not need that, so let me remove that. And perfect, the comma as well. And perfect, that looks good. We do not have any change in app settings. I can revert that back as well. Next, we have a change in login partial.cs HTML. Now this is not a change. You can see an A here. That means a new file _login partial has been added. And in that partial view, we basically have the login and register button. If a user is already signed in, then we have the logout link and we have a details link to manage that user. We are injecting few things here. Do not worry about any of them right now. Basically, a new partial view has been added here. And let me see what we have in the areas, account. Quite a few files have been added right here. But with all of that configured, if we go to Solution Explorer, inside areas, we have a new folder with the name of identity. We can remove the data because there we had the application DB context. But in identity pages, it added all the pages that we selected. And we selected all of the pages that were available with the identity package. So you can see there are quite a few pages right here. And all of these pages are not MVC pages. They are Razor pages that we saw in the beginning of the course. I gave you a brief idea on how Razor pages work. For example, we have the login, then we have the .cs HTML.cs for the page model. So right here in the page, we have the page model, we have login, we have email password and a submit button. On the page model here, we have few details, but then we have the onGet handler and we have the onPost handler. So that must feel familiar to what we have already seen in Razor pages. Now when the identity was implemented by Microsoft in initial version of .NET Core 2, there were both MVC and Razor page implementation, but later on Microsoft moved identity only to Razor pages. That way they do not have to maintain that in both the places. So unfortunately, the identity that we have is only in Razor pages. But good thing is Razor pages are not that different, and we have seen how to perform CRUD operation in Razor pages. So you should also have a basic understanding on how Razor pages work. But if we run the application, how can we see the login and register page? Because if I run right now, you will notice on the home page we do not see anything in the navigation. Adding that is super simple. If you remember, it already added one of the partial view. Let me show that in the web project, which was login partial right here. So basically, if I go to pages, well, not here in the default views, shared we have login partial, and that has the login and register button. What we can do is in underscore layout, we can add call to that partial view. So right here after the UL, and this UL is the navbar nav, and rather than flex grow 1, let me make it me auto. And after that UL here, we will be adding partial. Name is equal to, and name of that view is login partial. Make sure there is no spelling mistake there. Save that and let me go back. Perfect. You can see when we save it, we have register and login right here. We have to toggle the text there. So if I go back here, I will remove the text dark. We do not need that in any place here. Perfect. Save that and let me see. Perfect. Now we have the register and login buttons here, and when we click on them, it is taking us to identity, and then it has page account register. Now why is this not working? Let me explain that in the next video. Now in our application, if we click on register or if we click on login, you will notice that it does not work. Can you pause the video and try to think, or maybe even Google on why that is not working? It is a little bit tricky, but I want you to see if you can identify on what is missing, and to give you a hint, something is missing in program.cs file. I hope you were able to figure that out. Now if I go back to the project here, we added login partial. Let me examine that. When we go to login partial, we have the ASP area, but we do not see ASP controller or ASP action for routing. We rather see ASP page, and if you remember, that is used for Razor pages. So what we have here is indeed correct, because register and all the identity pages are indeed Razor pages. But in the program.cs file, we only have support for MVC. If we go back here, that is the route that is being supported, and we do not have any services that tells that, hey, our application will also have Razor pages. So we need to add that basic configuration and tell our application in services we will register, add Razor pages, and then where we have the pipeline here, we will say app.map Razor pages. That will make sure that it adds a routing that is needed to map the Razor pages. With that configured, now the register and login should work as expected. If I click on register here, perfect. We have a default registration page provided by the .NET team, and there is email, password, and confirm password. If we click on login here, we have email and password. So you can see many of the pages have already been implemented and provided to us by the .NET identity. But before we move forward with login and registration, let's say when we register a user, where will this user be saved in the database? We do not have any tables in the database. But what actually happens is, because of the identity, when we add a migration, it will automatically add migration to create all the identity related tables. Let me see that. We will close all the tabs here, Tools, Package Manager, Console, and I will add a migration, add identity tables. We have to change the default project and press enter. Perfect. You can see in the migration it is creating a table ASP.NET Roles, ASP.NET Users table, role claims, and many more tables related to identity. So all of this configuration of tables is already being done in the .NET identity. All we have to do is add migration and update database. You can think about, if you had to do all of this implementation, it would take quite a few time, and then also when it comes to security, you need to be very sure that everything is super solid. The .NET team has taken care of all of that, and we can just use that with confidence. Once that is done, if I switch back to the SQL Server and examine tables, great, we have so many new tables that are created for identity. The main table here is the users table, and you can notice all the identity related tables will have ASP.NET before the table name. So users table is basically ASP.NET user, roles table is ASP.NET roles. In the users table, we have username, email, we also have phone number, but it is possible that you might want more properties in a user table, like you might need address of the user, full name of the user, and much more. So now the question is, how can we modify the existing users table and add more columns based on our requirement? Let me show you that in the next video. Now we want to add more tables to the users table, which is the default implementation in .NET Identity. For that, if I switch back to the application, let me close everything here, and if I examine program.cs, where it added the default identity, you can see the default user is identity user. But if we want to add more properties to identity user, we can always extend that user. So basically in our models here, let me create one more file, and I will call that application user. We will make that a public file, and in that file we need to make sure it extends the identity user, and we will have to add the using statement. For that, we will have to install the package microsoft.extensions.identity.store. Once we do that, that means application user will have all the default settings of identity user. On top of that, let's say we want to add name of the user, and that will be a required field. Along with the name here, we can add 4 more properties like street address, city, state, and postal code. We can make them nullable, but name will be required. Now once we have that, we need to add that to migration. And we also have to add a mapper for that. So if we go to application DB context, we will create a DB set for that. So DB set here on application user, and I will call that application users. With that configured, we can add a new migration, and I will call this extend identity user. The migration, you can see it is adding column city. There is also a discriminator column, but we have name, postal code, state, and street address. Looks good. Let me update the database, and let me switch back to the database, and let me do select top 1000 again. Perfect. It added all of those columns, but one column is this discriminator column. What exactly is that? Well, now in our application, if you think of that, we have 2 types of user. We have identity user and we have application user. So discriminator column will basically have a value that will tell that the user on that record, is that an application user or is that an identity user? Simple as that. But with that, we have seen how to extend the default identity user in our project and add more columns. We have added application user in our models, and we have pushed that to our database. But the default identity here is still using identity user. With that, let me run the application and try to see how the default registration and login functionalities work. So let me register for a user here, and I will call that test@gmail.com. Password, I will do admin123* with a capital A, because if I only use 123, you can see password is not strong enough, so we have to keep something strong. I will add admin123 star and register. Perfect. Once I register here, it automatically signs me in. But if we log out here, and then if we go to login, we can try that again, test@gmail.com and admin123. I did not add the asterisk at the end, so we should see invalid login attempt. That looks good. Now let me type the correct password. Perfect. With correct password, it logs me in and we have a profile. And on the top right here, we see hello test@gmail.com. Now if you click there, it displays the profile where it displays username, phone number. They can update their email, verify email, modify their password, add a two-factor authentication, and they can download or delete their personal data. All of this is provided by default with the identity that we scaffolded. So you can see when we scaffold, it provides many things, not just the basic identity setup, and it is more like a complete identity package. But of course, if you add more fields to register, you can always update profile and all the other pages. But before anything, let me switch back to SQL Server and examine the user that got created in the ASP.NET Users table. Perfect, you can see we have the record here. If you scroll to the right, what should be the discriminator column? Will it be application user or will it be identity user? If you said identity user, you are correct. You can see that right here. Because right now in our application, the default identity is identity user. But on top of that, the important thing is when we are registering the user, we are creating an identity user and not an application user. So we need to modify that, because with identity user, we will not get city, name, postal code, state and street address. If we want to capture those properties, we need to find out a way to register an application user. So let me work on that in the next video. Now we have the discriminator as identity user. Changing that to application user is super simple. But before I walk you through that, let me go back here in area, identity, pages, account. We have register. Let me open the register page model. Again, this is a Razor page here, and you can see we are injecting many things in dependency injection. I want to spend some time to explain you few things right here. Now think about when you are implementing a login or registration functionality, you will have to write all the code of what should happen when a user enters username and password. You will have to encrypt that code. You might have to validate that with what it is there in database, and then you can be like, okay, authentication looks good, login is successful. On top of that, you will have to store that in session or some place that user is logged in, and you might have to store the details about user in session. Now these are only the basic things. If you think about the complete authentication, there are way more functionalities that are needed. Taking care of logging a user, all the way to logging out a user and managing their credentials between there. When we use the .NET identity, .NET team has taken care of all the heavy lifting for us. And they have given us these classes like sign-in manager, user manager, role manager to manage roles, and all of that is provided by default. All we have to do is directly inject them in dependency injection, and then using user manager or sign-in manager, we can manage the user. Now sign-in manager expects the type of user, and that is identity user. You can keep that, that is okay. We only want to change the discriminator when we are creating that user with the help of these helper classes. If we scroll down in Razor pages, if you remember, we have handlers. So we scroll down, we have a get handler and we have a post handler. Inside the post handler, you can see there is a method which says create user. If you press F12 or if you scroll down, you will see that method right here. That create user is doing nothing, but it is creating an instance of identity user. Rather than that, we want to create an instance of application user, and we will have to update the return type here as well. That will make sure that create user right here, the user will now be of type application user. Then on line 120, you can see we have a helper method in user manager, which is create async. There it expects a user object and password, and it will automatically create that user. So when this method will be invoked, it will insert an entry in the ASP.NET users table, and on top of that it will encrypt the password as well. So helper method is taking care of all the heavy lifting. On top of that, if result is successful, we scroll down. It is also doing something to generate email token and sending email, but it is only the interface. Implementation of that has not been done. But if you examine on line 144, we are using sign in manager and we are automatically signing in that user. And because of that, if you remember, when we register a user and hit the submit button, it automatically signs in the user. We do not have to write any code. We are only calling the helper method in sign in manager and user manager. So that is great. Now that we have modified the user to be application user, let me run the application and see what happens. Let me try to register a new user. I know this will be an application user, so let me say application user at gmail.com. We will enter a password and hit register. It will automatically sign us in as well. If we go to database and execute that, we have the application user here, and if we examine the discriminator, you can see it is of type application user. So things are indeed getting different here, and we can now register an application user rather than default identity user. Now because we are adding application user here, on user we have more properties, like if we want name or if we want street address, we can populate all of them. But before I populate all of those properties, what is the role of current user? By default, when you add identity, it does add the table to manage roles, but if you examine the roles table, it is empty. So we do not have any roles in our website, like if we want admin role, employee role, company role, or any individual role, we do not have any roles. We have to write some code to seed this ASP.NET roles table, and then we have to use some helper methods that when a user is created, based on what we select in role, we want to assign that role. So let me first work on that in the next video. We want to work on roles and how we can configure the identity. If I go back to my code here, let me stop the application and open program.cs. In the add default identity, it only adds identity user. It does not add role to the identity in our project. If we have to add the role, then rather than default identity, we have to customize that, and we will say, hey, I want to add identity. Now when you add identity, by default along with user, it expects a role as well. And just like identity user, we have a default implementation which is identity role. With that particular line, we have added roles to our identity, and that is included in our project now. Once we add a role here, let's say when we are registering a user in a dropdown, we want to display all the roles that are available. But right now, if we go to our database, we do not even have any role. We need to seed that role. So what I will do is right now I will have a hacky way of adding those roles. In the onGetHandler, basically when page will be loaded, I will check in the database, hey, is there a role of admin here? If there is, then I won't do anything. But if there is no role, then I will create that role right here. In order to do all of that, we will need helper class here. Just like sign in manager, we also have something called as role manager. Role manager works on identity role, and we will have to inject that using dependency injection. So let me do that. Role manager is equal to role manager. Let me scroll down where we have the onGetHandler. Now first I want to check, is there any role? Rather than having magic string of admin or customer, let me create a file that will contain those constant, and for that we have bulkybook.utility where we added a class static detail. Inside there I will create 4 constant. One will be customer role, then I will add a company role, an admin and an employee role. Based on the roles here, we might have some functionality that we want to turn on and turn off. Right now we will be working with admin and customer role. But before anything, we have to create these roles inside our database. We will do that in register here. We can check using our helper method underscore role manager. There is a helper method role exists async. We can check, hey, is there a role with the name of sd.roleUserCustomer? If there is, then we do not want to do anything. But if that role does not exist, then we want to create all the roles. Now because this is an async method, we will have to await that. So rather than writing await right here, what we can do is after the method here, we can say .getAwaiter.getResult. That is same as writing an await statement, but when we are calling here, we cannot do that. So that is why we can use getAwaiter.getResult. So that will check if the role exists. If it does not exist, then we want to create that role. So on role manager, we have another helper method, create async. Inside there, if you hover, it expects an identity role. We will have to create new identity role, and there we have to pass the role name. So I will say role customer. Once I do that, again it is an async, so we will await that. We can use getAwaiter.getResult. Now we can check if any of the role does not exist. We want to create all the roles that we have inside our static detail. So let me do that. And perfect, that looks good. Now let me use full name here. And rather than user, let me directly use customer, or if it is a company client maybe. So here I will rename them to be company, and I have customer. That makes more sense. Great. So we are creating 4 roles in our database. Now when we are using the create async or those helper method, we do not need save changes. The helper method is taking care of everything, and we do not have to worry about adding a unit of work or any DB changes. With that configured, let me save this and run the application. In order to create the role, all we have to do is click register, and that will invoke the getHandler. But when we do that, we will see an exception. It says unable to resolve iEmail sender while activating register model. What exactly is going on here? Why are we seeing this iEmail sender error now? The reason is in register we modified the create user, but on top of that, if you scroll up, we have iEmail sender that has been injected here. And we are using this email sender, if we scroll down, in order to send emails, but that is not important. When it is trying to inject the email sender, it gives the error message, and because we have not implemented this interface, it is saying that, hey, I am not able to resolve on what should be the implementation for this email sender logic. And that is exactly the same thing with unit of work as well. If you remember where we have the interface of unit of work, we added the implementation of that in program.cs, and after that it was able to give us that implementation when we asked in dependency injection. But email sender does not have a default implementation. In order to solve that error, all we have to do is have an implementation for email sender. Now of course we do not want to spend time right now to implement the email logic, but we can implement a fake email sender because the error is when it is trying to inject and not actually sending the email. Now where should we add the implementation for email sender? That is something common, and I believe it should fall inside the utility project. So let me stop the application, utility, add a class file, and I will call that email sender. We will make that a public class, and that should implement the iEmail sender. We will press Ctrl dot, and we will have to install the package microsoft.asp.core.identity.ui. Once we install that, then we will have to implement the interface as well. So let me do that, and there is one method, send email async. Now right now, rather than throwing an exception here, it makes sense to only return task.completed. In future, if we have to send email here, we will actually have the logic here to send email. But right now we are keeping things super simple. Once we have the implementation, all we have to do is register that in our services. So builder.services.add scoped iEmail sender, and implementation is inside email sender. With that configured, the error should go away. And let me go to register here. And perfect, the page loaded. Now again, why this broke when we added a role is because in program we are no longer using the default identity. We are adding a custom implementation. Because of that, it does not have any fake implementation for email sender. But once the get handler is invoked, our roles must be created. If I refresh here, perfect. We have our roles table automatically populated based on the name that we gave for our role. So perfect. Our roles table is now populated, and we have user. When we register a user, how can we assign user some role? Let me do that in the next video. Now that we have roles in our database, when we register a user, I can add a drop-down here where user can select any of the existing role. Now you might be saying that, hey, you are giving someone the right to register an admin user from the registration page. Is that a good approach? Of course it's not. But right now we are learning things, and that is why we will keep it here. But later on in the advanced sections, I will obviously remove that before the code is being deployed. So right now we are learning things, and it is completely okay when you are learning. But when you deploy, make sure that does not go into production. So we need to add a dropdown. When we add a dropdown on the UI, we need to pass some things from the page model. That way it will be accessible on the page, and we can display that in a dropdown. So we have the page model here, and we have input model where we have bind property in Razor page. Inside that input model, I will be adding more properties. So what we will do is after confirm password, let me create a property which will be string of role. And then we actually need a role drop-down list. For that we need an IEnumerable of select list item. So let me close this here, and I will add an IEnumerable of select list item, call that role list, and for validation I will say validate never. Once we have that IEnumerable, we need to populate that inside the onGet right here. So we need to populate the input is equal to new input model. We can use the new syntax here. In there we want to populate role list, and in order to access all the roles, typically we use unit of work, but when we are working with identity, we have role manager. Inside there we have roles, and that will have list of all the roles. Now we do not want all the roles, we will have to project that to be a select list item. So for projection we will use select, and we can say x goes to x.name. We only care about the name. We select that name, and once we select that name we will project that into the select list item. So I goes to new select list item, and we want to populate text is equal to I and value is equal to I as well. What we are doing is from roles we are selecting only the name, and whatever we are selecting here we are adding that to a select list item, and we are adding that field to both text and value. You can see how projections can get super fancy and how they simplify multiple line of code in just few lines of code. Now the final thing is to display this particular role list inside our register. So areas, we have the register here, and let me copy this div, paste it one more time. We do not want any validation here or label as well. All we need is a select field. So you can use input or you can use a select here, where ASP4 that is input.role and ASP items is equal to model.input.role list. Give it a class name of form select. Perfect. Now again, when you are using ASP4, it automatically checks the model, but if you are using any other tag helper, you have to use the @model before that. With that configured, let me save and restart the application. I think I had to restart because hot reload might not kick that in, but let's see. Perfect. We have admin, customer, employee, and company. On top of that, I can also go back, and within select, I can add an option which is disabled to select a role. If I go back, perfect, looks good. Now we have added role in the UI, but based on our selection, we have to assign that role to a user. Doing that is super simple, and we have to write one line of code in the register on post handler. We will do that if the create user is successful right here, because we are checking if result is succeeded of creating user. If that is, then we want to assign role. We will first check if input.role, if that is not null, or rather than that, let me do string.is null or empty. If that is not null or empty, then we want to assign role, and we will say await on user manager. We have a helper method add to role async. Now you can see there are two methods here, so be careful when you type. If you type add to roles async, that means you are adding multiple roles to a user. You can see it expects an IEnumerable of roles, but we are only adding one role. So we will say add to role async, pass our user and the role that has been selected by the dropdown. In the else part here, I can copy and paste that And basically, if user does not select anything from the drop-down, then I want to assign them st.role of customer. So if input.role is not null or empty, we will assign that, else we will assign them the role of customer. It is super simple, thankful to all the helper methods that are provided by the .NET Identity. With that configured, let me restart the application. Whenever I make change in the .ces file, I feel like restarting just to be confirmed. Now let me register here. I will set test admin at Gmail and we will select a role of admin. And we see an exception here where it is generating email confirmation token. And that is because of the same thing. Previously we were using the default identity and that included the implementation, but when we have the add identity, it is not included by default. So we have to add the add default token providers. Because when we register in the page model here, you can see it is generating the email confirmation token and that requires the default token providers. But if you examine, that code is after the user is created and role is assigned. So that means our user should be created in database. If I go to ASP.NET User, perfect. We have the test admin here. And how do we see if that user is assigned the correct role? Well, we have a mapping table which is ASP.NET User role that maps user to their corresponding roles. If I do select top 1000 and examine the user ID, it ends in 80. That is correct. The role ID here starts with 045 and if I go to the roles table, 045 is admin. So that means correct role have been assigned in our database. Let me try to register one more. Let's go back and this time we should not see the error message of token. Let me see that. This time let me register an employee and let's register. Perfect. We don't see that error here. Let me go to database. Employee ends in 19. Let me refresh here and perfect. The new user has a role that ends in 19, that is employee. Now finally, if we do not select anything, by default it should be customer that ends in 12. Let me test that as well. We will not select any role and register that. Perfect. If I go here, once again customer is 12. New user should have 12 and that looks correct. So with that we can see users are being created in our database and correct roles are being assigned to those users. We did not have to write much code to implement that. All credit goes to the built-in helper method provided in User Manager and Role Manager. With that configuration, let me continue from the next video. Now that we have users who have actual roles in our website, we can make one modification. And that is the content management should only be visible if a user is admin. If it is not, then they should not see the content management right here. So how can we check role of a logged in user? For that, if we go back to the application, and we have to add that inside the underscore layout, which is the master page. There we have the drop down right here. To check role of a logged in user, we can add an if condition using the Razor syntax, and we have the user object that is already available with the project. So we can check if user, there is a helper method is in role, and we can check the name of the role. We need the static details here, but it is not accessible. We have to add the using statement. We will say bulky book dot utility, and if we do not want to add it here, we can add that inside the view imports right here. And let me also add that in the other views that we have. So in areas, actually, admin, views, view import, paste that, customer, views, view import, and let me see the identity. We have view imports, paste that. Now I will also paste the other two inside identity, and I think I cut that. So perfect, that looks good. Let me close all the tabs. I had too many tabs open. Let me collapse all, and we were working on views, shared underscore layout. So now SD is accessible, and we can say if user is in role admin, then we want to display this particular li. If I save that and run the application, you will notice that this dropdown will be hidden unless the user is an admin user. So right now we do not see that. If we log in as test customer, it will not be available. You can see that. And if we log out here, let me log in as test admin. Whoops. It should be admin. There we go. And perfect. Then we are able to view that. Now here we are only toggling when to display this content management. But if someone has the URL here, if they log out here, and even then if they type the URL, you can see they are able to access that and manage categories. That should not be possible. We need to make sure that only admin has access to this page. Adding that is super simple, and what we will do is where we have the controller, let me go to areas, admin, controller. We are in the category controller. Here we can add an authorize keyword, and we are telling that only the roles is equal to SD dot admin can access all the controller's action method. So if a user tries to access the index action or any other action method, if their role is not admin, they will not get that access. This authorize keyword, you can add that at the complete category controller. That will apply to all the action methods, but if you want to apply them individually, you can also do that on top of the individual action methods. So whichever route you want, you can select that. I am going to apply that globally for category controller as well as product controller. Once we do that, let me save the application here. Let me log in as an admin first. We should be able to access that. Let me log out and let me log in here as test customer. And if I paste that URL here, you will see something odd. It is going to account and then access denied, but we do not have that page. If you go back and search in the Solution Explorer, we do actually have an access denied page. Let me show that, which got added in the identity, but that is inside identity area. Here it is trying to look directly into account access denied. If it was like this, then that page is actually loading. So the default route for access denied is not working, and we have to overwrite that. And it is not only that route. If I log out here, and if I try to access the admin product, you will notice it is redirecting me to log in. Because a user is not logged in, they cannot access that. First, they have to be logged in, and then they must have the role of admin. So here also it is missing that particular area, which is identity. If we have that, then it will work. Now these are the default application path that are set by default in the application. But because we added the identity here, we have to overwrite those default configuration, and we will do that inside program.cs. Let me minimize this and open program.cs. Inside the builder.services, we have something called as builder.services.configure application cookie, and there on the option we have login path, logout path, access denied, and other configuration. Right now I will only toggle these three configuration, and with that let me restart the application. With that change, if we try to access admin product, things will still not work. It is still going to the old route. What exactly is going on here? Well, when you add configure application cookies, there is one thing that you should remember. You cannot add that before you add identity, so we have to add that after line 16, and only then it will work. With that saved, let me restart the application. This time if I try admin category, it redirects to the correct path, and if I log in as customer, we will see access denied. Perfect. With that we have implemented authorization successfully based on role of the user that has logged in. Now one thing that I want to do is on register and login UI. Let me change the default UI a little bit. You can see we have two partitions here. Rather than that, let me make register the full page. I will move the section below register. So let me switch back here. We have the register page here where we have column MD4. Let me make it column MD12. And the other one I will make it MD12 as well. That looks good. Then let me go back here and I will be adding a div with class of card, and I will give it shadow, border 0, margin top of 4. Within that div I will create 3 more div for card header. Inside there I have row and column 12. I will add the h1 there, so remove it from here, and rather than h1 let me make it h2, give it a class of padding y2 and text white, and we will display register. We do not need this view data. Let me see how it is coming along. This looks good for our header. And then we have the card, we have card header. We will add another class card body and padding of 4. Within that we will be pasting the complete row that we have here. So let me cut and paste that. And where we have the row, let me add padding top of 4. Let me go back and see how things are coming along. Looking much better here. Now to create a new account, let me bring that to center of the screen. So where we have the h2 here, let me make that h3. I will make this padding 3, and I will add some bootstrap classes here, border, border bottom, some padding, and text secondary with text center. Perfect. Create a new account. It looks good, and I believe we have 2 HR. Let me remove one, and great. Now email, I wanted to take the full width, but all the other fields I will make them column MD6. That way they will take only 6 columns. And the text here, let me make that text muted. So all the labels here, let me add a class of margin S2 and text muted. I will add that for all the labels. That looks good. Let me save that. And perfect. I like that one. Now the email here, I wanted column 12, but everything else I will make it column 6. I will add that for medium screen, so let me fix that as well. Perfect. If I save that and go back, that looks good. I need to put that in a row. So where we have the form here, I will add a class of row and it should add that. Perfect. That looks much better. The button here, let me fix that. I will also add that in a div, give it a class of column 12. And let's see. Great. Where we have the use another service, I want to add a line here and type text of or, so they can use this register or they can sign in using some other service, which you can configure if you want, like Facebook authentication, Google authentication, Twitter, or any other third-party service. But right now I just want to add that line. So if we go back here, we will have to add some line in the CSS. We have site.css. Let me paste what exactly I am doing. I am adding a color here, flex 1, giving it a border bottom and a margin. Now this I am doing before and after using CSS. So we will have to give this class divider text. Let me go to register here, and where we have the use another service, I will add a paragraph, give that the class of divider text and deflex. Inside there I will write or here and remove this HR. Save that and let's go back. Perfect. I like the or here, but let me add some padding, top 2. And I think 3 will be better. Perfect. That looks much better. With that we have the register UI that looks good. The selector role that we have here, let me make that column MD6 as well. And let me save that. Perfect. So our register UI is looking great. Let me add the same code inside the login as well. So we will go to the login UI this time. Areas, identity, login. Where we have the column MD4, this will be 12. Scroll down. This will be 12 as well. And if I go to register, I can copy the paragraph tag here, paste it in the section here, and remove HR. Let me see. Perfect, looks good. Let me add the card here. So we go to our register and I will copy everything till the card body. Paste that in the login here and let me add the closing div tags. Perfect. In the card body here, let me copy the row, rather cut that and paste it right there. We will display login here and we do not need this view data. Let me clean that. Great, our UI is looking much better. I will arrange these 3 links. We have that in the main div here. I can use the bootstrap deflex and justify content between. That should bring them all in one line. And perfect. This looks much better than what I had. And with that, our register and login UI are looking much better. I will align this to center, so let me fix that as well. In register, we have some classes. Copy and paste them where we have the h2 and make that h3. Perfect. We don't need the extra HR. Remove that. Great. With our login and register UI updated, let me continue in the next video. Final thing that I want to toggle is in the ASP.NET user, we created many more properties. I want to add all of those properties in the register page. So we can go back here. We will have to add them first to the register page model. We scroll down, we have the input model, and there we have few properties. We added the role dropdown. We want to add the other properties, so you can copy them from ASP.NET Users if you want, but basically we want to add street address, city, state, postal code, and phone number. Now phone number, we did not add that in the application user, because if we switch to our database and examine the ASP.NET Users table, phone number column is created by default, that you can see right here. So I am adding a property in the register so we can capture and save that as well. Once we add that here in the register, we have to copy the email here, paste that one more time before the role here. Make sure to change that to column MD6. Next, what we have is street address. Copy and paste that. We do not want autocomplete. We can remove that one. And perfect, that looks good. Paste it 4 more times. Now rather than street address, I will update that to city. We have state, postal code, and phone number. Save that and let me see the UI. Perfect, that looks good. We need to update here as well, so let me do that. And perfect, that looks good. Let me take a look at that. We have a weird error here. Let me restart the application. Let me navigate to register and perfect. The register looks good. We have many more properties here and we have placeholder. Now you can obviously remove everything that is there in placeholder, but you can see because of placeholder, we are getting the fancy design that when we click, it slightly hovers on the top. And I personally like that. Because of that, I am going to leave the placeholder here. But of course, you can make the placeholder according to what the ASP4 is. I am not going to spend time editing that, but you can obviously fix all of that. With that, we have added all the properties on the register UI. Now when we post, we will receive all of them in the onPostAsync where we have our model. But when we are creating or passing the user here, we are only populating email for that user. We will also have to populate the other properties from the input model. So let me do that. Now let me go back to the database here. We also added name column there. So let me create that property as well. And name will be required. Save that here. That's okay, it should go away. Let me also modify here. We need to add the UI there. So let me copy the street address. I should add that right after email, but I want to keep password and confirm password together. So let me do name here. And I will cut name along with phone number. And I will cut these two, paste it right after email. So email, name, and phone number goes together. We have an error there. Let me see what it is. Well, we have an issue with the required. Let me see why. It says required is ambiguous reference between data annotation and some other required attribute. We will modify that to be data annotation. It is conflicting with something else there. So let me add that. And let me examine the change commit here. I want to make sure I did not add something. Yes, I did. I added this line, this using statement that was not needed. So remove that. And now required should work. Yep, sometimes when you add some other using statement, you can see how conflicts can happen. But thankfully, because of git changes, I can easily make sure that I only have the changes that I intended to go in this commit. With that configured, let me run the application. We still have an error here. And what is int here? And let me open application user. I think accidentally something is integer, which should not be. Whoops, name cannot be integer, it has to be a string. If we modify something there, we have to add a migration. I will call that update name to be string application user. I like to name migration as meaningful as possible, and I forgot to change the default project. Perfect. Let me update the database. And great, that is all done. Let me run the application and make sure everything is working. I will create a new user, and this time all the details will be populated. And we have multiple street address that is not correct. Let me go to register. This will be name, so let me change that to be full name. And perfect. Let me type that once again. If I do not select a role, it will be customer role, and that works for this user. Let me create that. Perfect, that looks good. Let me switch back to the database here. And if I examine ASP.NET users, perfect. Now you can see all the columns are getting populated, and that is working as expected. Now I want to show you one small bug. If I log in with any user, and if we click on managing their profile here, previously there was a navigation here, and now it is gone. I want you guys to pause the video and try to find out on what exactly is wrong and why that is not working. To give you a hint, something is wrong in underscore layout in manage. I hope you were able to figure that out. Now if I open the underscore layout here, you can see the default layout is areas, identity, pages, and underscore layout. If you examine the pages here, we do not have any underscore layout. That is inside views, shared underscore layout. So we have to correct that path here to views, shared underscore layout. And with that, if you refresh the application, things will still not work. Let me show that. We will go to login here, and let me click on the profile. You can see it is still not working. The reason is simple again. We have added or modified the underscore layout that is inside manage. But how will all the pages inside manage know that it has to use this underscore layout? We do not have a view start file inside the manage folder. Because of that, the pages inside manage does not know that they have to use this underscore layout file. So what we can do is I can copy any of the view start file, copy that, paste it in the manage folder, and in there we just write underscore layout.cshtml. Then all the pages in manage now knows that they have to use this underscore layout, which has that manage nav bar. So we restart the application and everything should work now. Let me log in first. And perfect. You can see everything is working. Now similar to adding fields in the register, you can add that in the profile, but I am not going to do that. You already know how to accomplish all of that. I hope you have enjoyed the free video. Make sure to like the video and leave a comment if you have not done that already. Subscribe to the channel, that way you do not miss any free content. I have an advanced course on .NET Mastery where we will enhance the application that we have built so far and implement shopping cart checkout functionality with payment integration and build order management. You can find a link to that complete course in the description. I hope to see you guys again in some other programming video. Till then, happy coding!